I woke up with an unsettling feeling, my head pounding, but not from the wine I drank at last night's charity gala. I found Alex's hand resting on my back. I had left my pragmatic, middle-aged husband, Matt, who was always buried in work and tinkering with his vintage car, for a younger, attentive guy who hung on my every word. Matt wasn't a bad guy, just distant. He'd shut down during arguments, always leaving me with that frustrating smirk that said, "You're overreacting." If I ever withheld affection, he would just shrug and retreat to the garage. It was infuriating. That's when I met Alex, sweet, naive Alex, who treated me like I was the most desirable woman on the planet. But as I thought about our future, I faced a dilemma. Alex, despite his affection, was struggling to find his footing in life. Meanwhile, Matt, with his stable career and substantial income, supported the lifestyle I had become used to. Deep down, I realized I still had feelings for Matt, even if they were buried under layers of resentment. The night Matt left for a business trip, Alex reminded me about our plan. We had decided that while Matt was away, I'd make the call to finally end things. But as I held the phone, the weight of what I was about to do settled in my chest. Even though our marriage had become strained, Matt had always been good to me in his own way. He never raised his voice or made me feel threatened. But this decision had been made. It was time for a clean break. With trembling fingers, I dialed Matt's number. He picked up quickly, his tone as calm as always. "Claire, you don't usually call me at work," he said, sounding puzzled. I hesitated, knowing that once I said the words, there would be no turning back. "We need to talk when you get back. It's important," I started, my voice barely holding steady. He let out a sigh, sensing the gravity of my tone. "What's going on?" he pressed, but I couldn't bring myself to say it outright. Then Alex, still beside me, brushed his lips against my ear, urging me forward. "I want a divorce, Matt," I blurted, the words coming out more harshly than I intended. "I'm not happy. I haven't been for a while. I think we both deserve a chance to start over." A pause stretched between us. For a moment, I thought the call had dropped. But then Matt spoke, his voice cool and steady. "Does this have anything to do with the man I know you've been seeing?" My heart skipped a beat. He knew. Of course he did. Matt was never oblivious. He probably saw the signs long before I even realized what I wanted. A chill crept up my spine, numbing my tongue, and the phone nearly slipped from my sweaty grip. Matt's words hung in the air, his voice sharp and cutting. I could picture him leaning back in his sleek office chair, watching the city skyline, as he spoke with the same detached coolness he always wore, like a suit of armor. He had always known, hadn't he? And yet he never confronted me, never pressed the issue, never gave me a reason to believe he would. I didn't. My voice faltered, the steel I had tried so hard to muster slipping away like sand through my fingers. Alex's eager hands continued their clumsy exploration, but his touch felt distant now, like an echo in the background of a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. "Matt, I'm sorry, I. You don't need to apologize, Claire." His interruption was sharp, precise, as though he had rehearsed this response 1,000 times in his head. "I'm not angry. I just need to know where we stand. If you're so desperate to end things that you're willing to throw everything away for him, then maybe you're right. Maybe it's time we part ways." Hearing him say it out loud, hearing that calm acceptance of a reality I had barely allowed myself to imagine, cut deeper than any accusation or shouted insult ever could. It wasn't supposed to go like this. I had expected anger, a fight, maybe even a desperate plea. Not this measured resignation, as if he had already grieved the end of us long before I had found the courage to dial his number. "Look, Matt, it's not about him," I lied, the words tasting bitter. "It's about us. We've been drifting for years. You've barely looked at me since my voice trailed off, the truth too raw to voice. Since we stopped being young and carefree. Since life had turned from romantic dinners and impulsive weekend getaways to financial planning and social obligations. Since we had traded passion for stability." Matt's silence stretched out, heavy and unyielding. "You know what, Claire? Maybe you're right. Maybe I was the problem. I thought I was giving you space, giving you what you needed. Turns out, I was just giving you an excuse." There was a strange edge to his voice, something I couldn't quite place. "Tell you what, I'll move out for a while. Give you the freedom you're so desperate for. Let's see how much you enjoy it." He hung up before I could respond, leaving a hollow emptiness on the line that mirrored the one growing in my chest. I dropped the phone onto the bed, my hands trembling, and tried to focus on Alex's face. He looked concerned, his brows furrowing, but I barely saw him. My mind kept replaying Matt's words, the subtle challenge hidden in them. Freedom. The very thing I thought I had wanted. Why did it feel like a punishment now? Alex leaned closer, his breath hot on my neck. Claire, babe, is everything okay? Did he just... Give me a minute, I snapped, harsher than I meant to. He recoiled, hurt flashing in his eyes, and I reached out instinctively to touch his cheek, to soften the blow. I just need to think, okay? He nodded, but the concern remained lingering in the air like a stale perfume. I turned away, staring out the window at the empty driveway, the spot where Matt's car should have been. For years, I had convinced myself that I needed this, that I deserved a fresh start, a new chance at happiness. But now, with the prospect of that freedom within reach, I found myself haunted by the ghost of a love that still clung to me like a shadow. I could feel Alex's presence beside me, his neediness tugging at my attention, but it only deepened the ache inside me. He was sweet. Yes, but he wasn't Matt. He wasn't the man who had once challenged me to a dance-off in the middle of a crowded bar, who had carried me home when I twisted my ankle, laughing all the way. He wasn't the man who knew all my flaws and still chose to love me until I had made that impossible. I pressed a hand to my chest, trying to steady my breathing. This was what I wanted. It had to be. There was no going back now, no undoing the things I had said, the choices I had made. But as Alex's hands wrapped around my waist, as he whispered promises of a brighter future in my ear, all I could think of was the way Matt's voice had cracked, just slightly, when he said he'd give me my freedom. And I wondered, for the first time in a long time, if maybe I had mistaken my own selfishness for courage. If maybe, just maybe, I was losing something far more valuable than I had ever realized. I pulled away from Alex, suddenly suffocated by the warmth of his arms around me. The room felt too small, the air too thick, like I was drowning in a reality I had crafted with my own hands. His confusion was evident, but he didn't question me this time, just watched with those wide, earnest eyes as I stumbled toward the window, pressing my forehead against the cool glass. The street outside was eerily quiet, the kind of stillness that wraps around you like a blanket in the dead of night. My mind kept replaying Matt's last words, each one a knife edge that carved away at my resolve. He had always been composed, always the one to keep his cool when things went sideways, but there had been something different tonight. A weariness that spoke of long-buried hurt, of wounds that had festered beneath the surface while I played the role of the dissatisfied wife. What had I expected, really? That he'd beg me to stay, that he'd fight for me, or promise to change, or tearfully profess how he couldn't live without me. A part of me hated how much I had wanted that reaction, how much I had needed him to be shattered by my betrayal. But instead, he had walked away, leaving me to grapple with the emptiness that swallowed the space he once filled. Claire, talk to me, please. Alex's voice broke through my thoughts, his tone gentle but insistent. He reached out, hesitant, as if afraid I might shatter if he pressed too hard. What did he say that's got you so shaken? I turned to face him, struggling to find the words to explain a turmoil I barely understood myself. He was right there, so close, offering the escape I had thought I craved. But all I could see was the life I had left behind, the years of late-night conversations, of shared jokes and silent mornings, of arguments that always ended with one of us reaching out, refusing to let the other slip away. I thought I was done, I whispered, the admission slipping out before I could catch it. I thought I didn't care anymore. But hearing him say those things, hearing him give up on us, it's like he's the one choosing to end it, not me. And it's so much worse. Alex's brow furrowed, his confusion deepening. He stepped closer, but I held up a hand, needing the distance. My chest ached, every breath a struggle against the tide of regret that threatened to pull me under. This wasn't how it was supposed to feel. Freedom was supposed to be liberating, not hollow. Claire, you chose this, he said, his voice taking on a harder edge, like he was trying to remind himself as much as me. You wanted out. You said you were tired of being stuck in a marriage that didn't make you happy anymore. And I thought I was. I snapped back, the words cutting through the space between us like a blade. But now I don't know. Maybe I was just too scared to fix what was broken. Maybe I was afraid it wouldn't be enough. Alex's expression shifted, hurt flashing in his eyes. He took a step back, letting his hands fall to his sides. So what? You're saying this was all just a mistake? That you were using me to figure out your own feelings? I opened my mouth to deny it, but the lie caught in my throat. My silence hung between us, heavy and damning. He let out a bitter laugh, running a hand through his hair, and for a moment, I glimpsed the anger he'd been holding back. The realization hit me like a slap. He deserved better than this, better than to be caught up in the wreckage of a marriage I wasn't sure I was ready to let go of. "I don't know what I'm saying," I admitted, my voice small and cracked. I thought I knew what I wanted, but everything's so confusing now. Matt's willing to walk away, and maybe that's what I need, but I don't know if it's what I want." Alex's face softened, but the hurt was still there, a shadow behind his eyes. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear, but there was a distance in his touch now, a caution that hadn't been there before. "Claire, you've got to figure this out for yourself, not for me, not for Matt. If you don't, you're just going to keep hurting people, including yourself." His words struck a chord deep inside me, a truth I had been too afraid to face. I nodded slowly, the weight of my mistake settling like a stone in my chest. I had run away from my marriage, hoping to find clarity in the arms of someone else, but all I had found was the same confusion, the same loneliness that had haunted me for years. "Maybe you're right," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Maybe I need to be alone for a while. Figure out what it is I really want before I destroy anything else." Alex's expression was pained, but he nodded, stepping back to give me the space I so desperately needed. "Take your time, Claire. But just know, I don't know if I'll be waiting when you finally figure it out." The words cut deeper than I had expected, but I forced myself to meet his gaze, to acknowledge the hurt I had caused. He deserved that much at least. "I understand," I replied, and the finality of those words echoed in the quiet room like the closing of a door. He left without another word, his footsteps fading down the hallway, and I stood alone, the silence swallowing me whole. I turned back to the window, staring out at the empty driveway, and for the first time, I let myself truly feel the weight of everything I had lost. Matt's words echoed in my mind, a reminder of the choice that had led me here. Freedom. The very thing I had thought I wanted, but now, standing in its cold embrace, I realized it came with a price. And as the tears finally spilled over, I couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, I had been chasing the wrong kind of freedom all along. As the minutes stretched into hours, the quiet of the apartment became a suffocating blanket, pressing down on me until I could hardly breathe. I paced the length of the living room, the rhythm of my footsteps a desperate attempt to drown out the silence that had become my only companion. The clock on the wall ticked on, each second dragging me deeper into a well of regret I wasn't sure I could climb out of. Eventually, I sank onto the couch, the same one where Alex and I had spent so many nights wrapped up in each other, building a life that now felt like it was crumbling around us. The cushion still held the faint scent of his cologne, mingling with the memory of laughter and late-night conversations. But now it felt like a mockery, a reminder of how easily I had traded comfort for chaos, thinking it would make me feel alive again. Matt's words kept replaying in my head, each one a jagged edge that cut deeper every time I tried to dismiss them. He hadn't begged or pleaded, he had simply accepted. Accepted that I had moved on, that I had chosen someone else over him, and that there was nothing left to fight for. And it hurt more than any argument or accusation ever could have, because it meant that, in some way, he had already made his peace with losing me. I closed my eyes, leaning back against the cushions, letting the exhaustion seep into my bones. But instead of the numbness I craved, all I found was the ache of realization that maybe, just maybe, I had never really been fair to Matt. I had blamed him for the distance that had grown between us, for the nights when he came home late from work, too tired to do more than collapse beside me in bed. But I had never once stopped to ask myself if I had done enough, if I had fought for us as hard as I wanted him to. A shiver ran through me, and I pulled the blanket off the back of the couch, wrapping it around my shoulders like a shield against the cold. But no matter how tightly I clung to it, I couldn't escape the sense of loss that wrapped around me like a second skin. I had wanted freedom, wanted to break away from the routines and responsibilities that had begun to feel like a cage. But now that I had it, all I could see were the bars of my own making. The thought of calling Matt crossed my mind more than once, but I pushed it down each time, swallowing the urge until it burned in my throat. What would I even say? That I was sorry for how things had ended. That I wasn't as sure about my choices as I had pretended to be. It felt selfish, cruel, even to reach out to him when he was finally starting to move on. to drag him back into the confusion I had unleashed. But even as I tried to convince myself to leave him be, my fingers found my phone, hovering over his number like it was a lifeline I wasn't ready to let go of. I could imagine him picking up, the surprise in his voice turning to guarded curiosity as he waited for me to explain why I was calling. And I could imagine the silence that would follow, heavy and fraught with the words we had never spoken to each other. With a frustrated sigh, I tossed the phone onto the coffee table, burying my face in my hands. I didn't have the right to ask him for anything, not after walking away without looking back. And yet, the idea of leaving things like this unfinished, unresolved was like a splinter lodged deep beneath my skin. It hurt with every movement, a dull ache that I couldn't quite ignore, no matter how hard I tried. I was still sitting there, lost in my thoughts, when a knock at the door startled me out of my reverie. My heart leapt into my throat, a mix of hope and dread tightening my chest. For a fleeting second, I imagined it might be Matt, coming to demand answers, to confront me with the hurt I had caused. But when I pulled open the door, it was Alex who stood on the other side, his expression unreadable in the dim light of the hallway. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there with his hands in his pockets, looking at me like he was searching for something, maybe the same answers I had been struggling to find. I stepped aside, letting him in, and he walked past me without a word, settling onto the couch like he had so many times before. But the easy familiarity that had once been between us was gone, replaced by a tension that hummed in the air, sharp enough to cut through. "I couldn't just leave things like that," he finally said, breaking the silence that had stretched between us. His voice was low, almost gentle, but there was a hardness to it that I hadn't heard before. "I need to understand, Claire. What is it that you really want? Because I can't keep doing this wondering if I'm just some temporary fix for whatever you're running from." I swallowed hard, the weight of his question settling heavily on my shoulders. I had thought I knew the answer, once had thought that leaving Matt would make everything clearer, that it would give me the space I needed to figure out who I was without him. But all it had done was strip away the illusions, leaving me face to face with my own uncertainty. "I don't know," I admitted, the words raw and painful on my tongue. "I wish I did, but everything feels so tangled. I thought leaving would make things better, that it would make me happier, but now I'm just lost." Alex studied me for a long moment, his expression softening as he seemed to come to some kind of decision. He reached out, taking my hand in his, and for the first time, there was no urgency in his touch, just a quiet understanding, a shared recognition of the mistakes we had made. "Then maybe you need to figure that out on your own," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "And maybe I need to let you." The finality of his words settled between us, a quiet acceptance that felt like the closing of a chapter. I squeezed his hand, offering what little comfort I could, even as my heart twisted with the knowledge that this was goodbye. He stood, pressing a gentle kiss to my forehead before turning to leave, and I watched him go, the echo of his footsteps fading into the night. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I was truly alone. The thought terrified me, sent a shiver of fear racing down my spine. But beneath that fear was something else, something I hadn't felt in a long time. A flicker of hope, fragile and uncertain, but they're all the same. Maybe this was the beginning of something new. Maybe, in the space where everything had fallen apart, I could finally start to put the pieces back together. But for now, all I could do was sit with the silence, letting it wrap around me like an old, familiar friend. And as I stared out into the darkness beyond the window, I realized that sometimes the only way to find yourself again is to let everything else fall away. The days that followed felt like wandering through a fog, my thoughts drifting back to Matt more often than I cared to admit. The apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a place full of ghosts, shadows of the life we had shared. And every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, not the anger or the frustration, but the quiet patience that had defined him. The way he would sit beside me on the couch, listening as I poured out my worries, even when he didn't have the answers himself. I couldn't shake the sense that I had taken that patience for granted, that in my desperation to escape the monotony, I had overlooked the small acts of love that had been woven into every part of our lives together. The way he would wake up early to make my coffee just the way I liked it, or how he always made sure the door was locked at night, because he knew I worried about it. I thought about calling him, really calling him this time, not just hovering over the idea. But each time fear held me back, not the fear of rejection, but the fear that I had already done too much damage, that my leaving had severed something between us that could never be repaired. But Matt had always been better than me at facing the hard truths. He was the one who had insisted on talking through our problems when all I wanted was to bury them. The one who had fought for us even when it felt like we were on different sides. And maybe, just maybe, there was still a part of him that would be willing to listen. With that thought heavy in my mind, I found myself standing outside his apartment one evening, heart racing as I gathered the courage to knock on the door. My hands felt clammy, the cool autumn air biting at my skin as I fumbled with the words I had rehearsed a dozen times. I told myself that I wouldn't stay long, that I would just apologize and leave, give him the closure he deserved, even if it meant letting go for good. But when he opened the door, everything I had planned to say vanished, swept away by the sight of him standing there. He looked tired, more tired than I had ever seen him, but there was a softness in his eyes that made my breath catch. For a moment, neither of us spoke, caught in the weight of everything unspoken between us. Then finally, he stepped aside, gesturing for me to come in, and I followed him into the warmth of the apartment that had once been our home. The familiarity of it hit me like a punch to the gut. Nothing had changed, not really, but everything felt different. The photos on the wall, the blanket draped over the back of the couch, each one a reminder of a life that I had walked away from. We sat down at the kitchen table, a space that had seen countless meals and quiet moments shared in comfortable silence. Now it felt like a battlefield, the tension between us sharp enough to draw blood. Matt studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable, and I realized with a jolt of panic that I had no idea how to begin. "I'm sorry," I blurted out, the words tumbling over each other in my rush to get them out. "I know that probably doesn't change anything, but I'm sorry for how I left, for not giving you a chance to talk, for everything." He leaned back in his chair, rubbing a hand over his face as he considered my words. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost hesitant, as if he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "Why now, Claire? What's changed?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I thought that leaving would make things better, that I would find some kind of freedom or clarity. But all I found was how much I missed you. I realized that I never gave us a real chance, that I never fought for us the way you did. And I know I don't deserve another chance, but I couldn't keep pretending that I don't care. His gaze softened, and for a moment I thought I saw something like hope flicker in his eyes. But then he looked away, staring down at the table, his hands clenched into fists. "You hurt me, Claire. I'm not going to lie about that. But I don't think it's ever been about whether or not I care about you. It's about trust that you won't run the next time things get hard. And I don't know if we can get that back." The truth in his words cut deep, but I forced myself to meet his gaze, even as my eyes stung with unshed tears. "I know I broke your trust. And I can't ask you to forgive me or to forget what I did. But if there's even a small part of you that still believes in us, I want to try. I want to be better for both of us." He let out a shaky breath, closing his eyes as if he was gathering his strength. For what felt like an eternity, he said nothing, and I braced myself for the rejection I knew I deserved. But when he finally spoke, his voice was softer than I had expected, filled with a weary kind of hope that made my heart ache. Maybe we can try," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "But it has to be different this time, Claire. No more running. No more leaving when things get hard. If we're going to do this, we do it together." The relief that swept through me was like a wave, crashing over the fear and guilt that I had carried for so long. I nodded, too choked up to speak, and he reached out, taking my hand in his, just like he had so many times before. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to believe that maybe we could find our way back to each other, that maybe, in the ashes of what we had lost, we could build something new. We talked for hours that night, unraveling the knots of our past, facing the wounds we had both inflicted and endured. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I thought the weight of our mistakes would crush us. But through it all, Matt's hand remained in mine, a quiet reminder that we were still here, still fighting, even when it hurt. When the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, we found ourselves sitting side by side on the couch, the silence between us no longer a chasm but a bridge. I leaned my head against his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath my cheek, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. It wouldn't be easy. We both knew that. But as the morning sun filled the room with its soft golden light, I realized that maybe, just maybe, we had found our way back to each other after all. And as Matt wrapped his arm around me, pulling me closer, I allowed myself to hope that this time we wouldn't let go.
Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. It's a reminder that love can endure even the toughest trials, and honesty is the first step toward healing. If you found this story relatable or know someone who might need to hear it, be sure to share it with them. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more engaging stories that touch the heart, spark conversation, and inspire you.